Hồi tháng 3 vừa qua, tại cuộc họp thường niên được tổ chức đồng thời tại Hà Nội và thành phố Hồ Chí Minh, các hội viên Phòng Thương mại châu Âu tại Việt Nam đã bầu ra lãnh đạo mới năm 2014. Theo đó, chủ tịch mới của Eurocham là bà Nicola Connolly, tổng giám đốc của công ty Adecco Việt Nam. Bà Connolly bày tỏ vai trò mới như là một sự khởi đầu mới cho Eurocham và tuyên thệ sẽ nâng cao hoạt động của Eurocham để quảng bá Việt Nam thành một điểm đến đầu tư và thương mại cho các doanh nghiệp châu Âu và Việt Nam thông qua cải thiện môi trường kinh doanh. Với số lượng ngày càng lớn các doanh nghiệp châu Âu chọn Việt Nam làm điểm đến đầu tư, việc có một tổ chức như Eurocham nhằm kết nối các doanh nghiệp châu Âu và tạo điều kiện hỗ trợ họ hoạt động tại Việt Nam là một điều hết sức cần thiết, đồng thời giúp Việt Nam khẳng định hình ảnh là một điểm đầu tư hấp dẫn.
Eurocham được thành lập từ năm 1998 với khởi sự ban đầu chỉ có 60 hội viên là các doanh nghiệp châu Âu hoạt động kinh doanh tại Việt Nam. Thì tới thời điểm hiện tại là Eurocham đã hoạt động tại Việt Nam được 16 năm và cái số hội viên hiện nay là gần 800 hội viên là các doanh nghiệp châu Âu đang hoạt động kinh doanh tại Việt Nam. Vai trò và mục tiêu chính đó là hỗ trợ các doanh nghiệp châu Âu khi mà đến hoạt động kinh doanh tại Việt Nam. Chúng tôi cũng đóng vai trò là một cầu nối giữa các doanh nghiệp châu Âu và doanh nghiệp Việt Nam, cũng như là đại diện cho tiếng nói của các doanh nghiệp châu Âu để trao đổi có những cái đối thoại cũng như là đưa lên cái tiếng nói của cái khu vực doanh nghiệp châu Âu cho các chính phủ Việt Nam.
Eurocham thường xuyên tổ chức các hội nghị, các cuộc họp báo để công bố các nghiên cứu về môi trường kinh doanh, tổ chức hội đàm về chính sách thương mại, chính sách lao động, kết nối mạng lưới doanh nghiệp. Mới đây nhất, họ đã công bố kết quả cuộc khảo sát lần thứ 14 về chỉ số môi trường kinh doanh hàng quý được thực hiện vào tháng 2 năm 2014. Kết quả khảo sát cho thấy mức độ tin cậy và triển vọng kinh doanh trong cộng đồng doanh nghiệp châu Âu tại Việt Nam đang tăng cao. Đây là mức tăng trưởng quan trọng, phần nào khẳng định lòng tin của các doanh nghiệp châu Âu đối với thị trường Việt Nam. Eurocham cũng tổ chức các sự kiện gắn kết các doanh nghiệp châu Âu và Việt Nam như triển lãm Greenpeace 2013 do Eurocham cùng VCCI và Bộ Công Thương tổ chức mới đây đã kết nối được các giải pháp kinh doanh xanh giữa doanh nghiệp châu Âu với doanh nghiệp Việt Nam cũng như doanh nghiệp với chính phủ. Thông qua Greenpeace, các doanh nghiệp Việt Nam có thể tiếp thu nhiều thông tin và giải pháp công nghệ xanh, mà còn là cầu nối giữa các doanh nghiệp Việt Nam trong nhiều lĩnh vực và các tổ chức, công ty đối tác đến từ châu Âu. Bên cạnh đó, đây cũng là kênh đối ngoại quan trọng giúp các nhà hoạch định chính sách cấp cao của Việt Nam lắng nghe các chia sẻ của các chuyên gia trong nước, các tổ chức quốc tế, tổ chức xã hội dân sự và cộng đồng doanh nghiệp. Một ví dụ khác bên cạnh các hội nghị kinh tế có thể kể đến đó là lễ hội ẩm thực Food Festival. Đây là một trong những hoạt động hợp tác truyền thống thường niên của Eurocham trong nhiều năm qua, nhằm kết nối văn hóa cộng đồng các nước châu Âu với Việt Nam. Hy vọng rằng là nữ chủ tịch đầu tiên của Eurocham Việt Nam, bà Connolly có thể hiện thực hóa mong muốn làm việc với chính phủ Việt Nam, các hội viên và các đối tác Việt Nam và châu Âu để tối đa hóa thành công của các bên vì một Việt Nam thịnh vượng.
Và một tuần đã trôi qua và chúng ta lại gặp nhau trong chương trình Diễn đàn CEO trên kênh truyền hình VITV. Tôi là Hoa Lê. Thưa quý vị, được thành lập tại Việt Nam từ năm 1998 cho đến nay, Phòng Thương mại châu Âu tại Việt Nam hay còn gọi là Eurocham đã và đang đóng một vai trò to lớn trong việc kết nối các cơ hội kinh doanh tại Việt Nam cho các doanh nghiệp châu Âu, giúp nâng cao hình ảnh Việt Nam là một điểm đến đầu tư hấp dẫn. Nhân dịp Eurocham vừa tổ chức bầu ban lãnh đạo mới, chúng tôi đã hân hạnh mời đến trường quay bà Nicola Connolly, tân chủ tịch của Eurocham. Và bà Connolly cũng đồng thời là tổng giám đốc của công ty Adecco Việt Nam. Thank you for being on our show today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay. First of all, congratulations on your recent promotion in the European Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam. On the event, you described your new role as a fresh start for the Eurocham. So what will be the theme of your term?
I think one of the main things is I'm the first woman chair of Eurocham.
Yeah,
we have also got a woman vice chair and a woman on the committee. So in the last, I think, 3 or 4 years, you know, we've gone from 0 women to 3 women on the board. So which is very good, especially women in leadership seems to be a hot topic in Vietnam this year. So
Right.
it's nice that Eurocham is leading the way. Yeah, I mean the fresh start is really about you know, internal and externally the organisation, looking at how we can work smarter and better for our shareholders, our stakeholders, which is obviously our member companies. So it's really having a clearer vision and objectives for the next sort of 2 years within Eurocham. So I think, you know, the board see it is a fresh start. We've moved offices as well, so we have a nice new location and premises. So you know, it's a lot of different things have happened over the last month. So we're sort of thinking, yes, it's a fresh start, and let's really, you know, get the objectives and really deliver over the next 2 years.
So it means that you are quite confident about your new role in the Eurocham to make it a better place for businesses.
Yeah, I mean, I've been. I started off as a sector committee head, so I learnt the, how would you say, the background of Eurocham, and then we have our vice chairs as well. So we're trying to make sure that everybody has a role to play. You know, and that it's contributing to the organisations. Hopefully the outcome will be good as well.
The first chairwoman of the Eurocham, and as you said, the Eurocham's board so far has 3 women, and I think that it will be a very charming change for the organisation. So Nicola, we all know one of the Eurocham's activities is publishing the Business Climate Index, or PCI, which is an indication of the members' view on the Vietnam business climate. So, Nicola, what is the remark on the Vietnam's business environment in Vietnam in recent years and the time to come?
I mean, the Business Climate Index it's a quarterly report. I think we've been doing it for 16 quarters now. Yeah. So I think it started like 2010, so just before the global economic crisis. Yeah. If you look at the last quarter, the report is 59 out of 100 for Vietnam. So it has been, it's slowly on the increase. The last 3 quarters have been below 50, you know, 40, 49, 48, or just a little bit above 50. So that's a big concern. I know that we've had phone calls from various ministries, because we obviously share that with the government and the National Assembly. So I know that there was some phone calls, you know, asking us to really just give a bit more details on why, what's the sentiment from FDIs in Vietnam. So it has been very low. You know, below 50 is not a good sign. Yeah. The good thing about the questions, we ask about 10 questions, is that nobody's looking to move, but it means that they may be not looking to invest more in Vietnam, which is a concern, you know, also because, you know, companies need to be continuously adapting their businesses and updating their technologies. So, you know, what we're starting to see now is that people are looking at bringing in additional investment into Vietnam, which is what we want to see. So, yeah, I don't think it's going to get to the heydays of, you know, 70s, 80s and until the next couple of years, you know, because we've got to make sure that inflation is kept under double digits. But I think it's a good sign, you know, it's come at the right time, you know, it's a new year, you know, it's after Lunar New Year as well, so I think people are a little bit more positive doing business in Vietnam.
Yes, the index was set up in 2010, and I think that when the economy has recovered, so the index is improved day by day. So what are the biggest challenges for the European companies operating in Vietnam?
Probably the 3 things that most companies would complain about here, whether they're in Vietnam in terms of European companies or if they're European companies coming over, is the first one would just be the administration procedures. It's a very, very lengthy, you know, to get a license in Vietnam. It takes, I would say, I mean, I've launched a couple of businesses in Vietnam. You know, it's taken up to a year from the date of submission. You know, so that just causes a lot of issues because, you know, when companies come to invest in Vietnam, they've done the research, etc. But, you know, they're excited about coming into Vietnam. Everyone looks at the population, the demographics, and, you know, the story of Vietnam, how it's changed in the last 20 years. And then you sort of come in, you're desperate to launch your business, start your business, hire people, and really, make money in Vietnam for you and also the country. And then you could be sitting there for a year, 18 months. So it's very frustrating. Vietnam loses its shine a little bit. You sort of lose heart. It's a long time when you compare to maybe Thailand or Indonesia or Malaysia, which Vietnam is compared to.
Yeah.
So that would be something that needs to be done. I understand there's going to be a Project 12. We had Project 30, I think, 3-4 years ago about administration procedures, and I think the government got rid of 2,000 administration processes, which is a good sign. But obviously we've had a lot of law changes over the last 2 to 3 years, so I don't know whether we've just swapped them for something else. So there's, I think, a Project 12 where we would be looking at giving input to the government in terms of what they can reduce on administration processes. The second thing really for us would be the Eurocham and its members would be transparency. Obviously, if you look at Eurocham, a lot of our companies are Fortune 500s. We're publicly listed companies, so the transparency in how business is done in Vietnam is an issue. Because obviously it takes us longer because we cannot be seen or we cannot do anything that would cause a conflict of interest or unethical standards. So that's something that needs to be addressed. It tends to be at the lower levels rather than higher levels. If we have dialogues with ministries or heads of department, it's not an issue, because I think everybody wants the good of Vietnam. But it tends to be more in the lower levels, sort of the rank and file, where transparency, unethical behaviour is more prevalent, and that's the issue, because not only is it putting ourselves as European companies in a position, but also our Vietnamese staff who, they're starting to push back and saying, we don't want to do this, So I think the transparency is an issue. And then the third thing would be intellectual property. Business secrets, trademarks. When you come over and you're launching a brand, whether it be a big brand or any brand, it's taking you time to come up with the logo, the brand image, the core values, etc. So the intellectual property rights are probably not strong enough for a lot of the companies, European companies that want to come over, because it's time and effort, and it costs money. So I think we'd want stronger laws, which I know the government has addressed over the last couple of years, but also to make sure that if it is that companies do then decide to take a company to court, that process is quite smooth, because sometimes, you could win a case, but then actually enforcing it is a totally different issue, So I think those three would be the biggest things that we would like to see over the next 3 to 5 years really start to be addressed in Vietnam.
About the administrative procedures, I think Vietnamese government has made many important decisions to improve it, and you may also see it. About the transparency and intellectual property, yes, of course, there are big issues in the context of deeper and deeper economic integration now, and Vietnam sure has to improve it, has to take into consideration seriously. Yes, with the role, Eurocham has many European companies to do business favorably in Vietnam, and has helped to build Vietnam's image as a good destination for investors. So what would be the activities that you think that you could continue to run or to change or accelerate in your term?
I think this term for Eurocham, if I probably look at it two ways, for Eurocham, I think we have a very good brand. I think we are seen as a trusted partner, and I think we're seen as an advisor as well. Vietnam is graciously allowed us to call itself our home. So I think it's very important for us to continue that. You know, we have very good relationships with the VCCI and the ministries and the Office of the Government, etc. So, you know, and we have that at different levels as well. You know, directors, deputy directors, vice ministers, ministers. So we have sort of like with a lot of the ministries, like an open door policy. You know, so I think it's very, very important that we continue to do that. I think it's very, very important that we continue to do that in as a like a consultant. You know, that we shouldn't be, how would you say, saying this is how you should do it. You know, what we should do as a European Union or a Eurocham is be able to say, look, these are the best practices. We have done some things wrong as well. We are not not perfect, but you know, this is what works in other countries. You know, and try and do those regional comparisons. You know, so if it is the government needs or a ministry needs information on what's happening with other countries within Southeast Asia, you know, we're part of Eurocham as part of the EU Asiana Business Council, which is other chambers within Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
So, you know, we have the network to be able to pull information, you know, from what's happening in Malaysia. You know, how do they deal with work permits? How does Indonesia deal with the cap of advertising, you know, for the 15%? So I think it's, you know, Eurocham should be seen as a gateway to to Europe, but also other Asian countries, and say, right, okay, you know, we can pull this information for you, we can do the comparisons, we can advise on best practices, you know. So I think it's really important to keep that approach. You know, it should be very much seen as a, you know, hand in hand, a partnership, because we want the best for Vietnam, not only hopefully for European companies, but also for domestic companies as well. And I think if we can continue that, you know, I think we can achieve a lot together. You know, there's still some things that we haven't done. You know, we'd probably like to see, you know, state-owned enterprises, that sector tackled. I think that's a very hard job. I don't envy anybody taking on that one. And then also, you know, looking at sort of tax reforms as well. So I think the approach that we've got works. We want to continue doing that. We'd like to have a lot more dialogue, a lot more consultation with the government, and be a lot more proactive with, you know, consultations and dialogue.
So talking about Vietnam's potentials that you have mentioned as an investor, what do you think of our competitive advantages compared to other countries in the Southeast Asia?
I think if you were to look at what Vietnam would be compared to Thailand in terms of population, obviously Indonesia is a lot bigger. I mean the good thing, if you look at Vietnam, politically it's stable. You have good literacy rates. You know, I think 40 or 50% of the population live on the main highway from Hanoi to Ho Chi Minh City, but it's stable. You know, the government has done a very, very good job at tackling inflation. So, you know, it's sort of tick, tick, tick. You know, the dong hasn't devalued. I think in about 3 years we've got inflation under control. You have the population demographics are good. You know, the potential market here is great. So you'd be sort of compared to Thailand, whereas with Thailand, you know, they have had political unrest. There, Indonesia, you're compared to as well, and Malaysia. But I think, you know, Vietnam has, you know, a lot going for itself. But, you know, I'm sure transparency is probably an issue in, you know, some of those countries as well, because they're developing countries. You know, you're not supposed to get it right as a developing country, because you're sort of learning as well. One of the biggest issues I think that Vietnam will face is, and not just Vietnam, but within Southeast Asia, is going to be the labour force. You know, you've got, I think, 47 million working population in Vietnam. you know, we talk about lack of skills. Is the education system preparing them for the workplace, retraining, upskilling? So I think, you know, that's going to be the biggest issue, you know, for Vietnam moving forward. Because if you don't have a labour force that is able to actually work the way that companies want them, not just European companies, I'm talking, you know, domestic as well, that's where you're going to lose out, you know. So I think there's been a lot of discussions over the last, I think, 6 to 9 months. I think the government is fully aware. They're looking at upgrading the vocational training, they're looking at the education system. But I think that's going to be the biggest issue that Vietnam faces over the next, like, sort of 10 to 20 years. Because if you don't, you can have a labour force, and, you know, Vietnam has an abundance of people in the labour force.
Yeah.
But the thing is if Vietnam wants to move to, you know, high technical value industries, you know, and be able to attract, you know, the Nokias and research and development and the Intels and those type of companies, they've got to have the labour force that is trained, you know. And if you look at companies such as Nokia, Intel, I think Samsung, you look at Bosch, they're actually now setting up their own training colleges, you know, and working with the government and the local authorities. So, you know, companies that have a huge investment can do that. But your normal company, you know, domestic companies as well, not just European companies, are they going to be able to set up a training college or vocational courses, etc.? So I think that's going to be, you know, something that Vietnam really needs to face, because obviously the population is going to get smaller as well. You know, if you look at Japan, you know, Vietnam potentially could be that way in 50 years. You know, so you've got to make sure that your labour force is trained, educated, because if Vietnam wants to move over, you know, to less labour intensive, you know, they've got to have that labour force ready. Thailand's actually done a good job of that 15, 20 years ago. Yeah. Japan's done a very good job, Korea and Taiwan. So I think that, you know, that's, if Vietnam wants to make their move, it needs to make that move. Otherwise, it may be still seen as a labour-intensive industry or country. So, you know, the type of FDI that they're going to attract is going to be, right, okay, it's a labour-intensive industry, which I don't really think, my understanding is that's not really the way that Vietnam wants to go. But the, you know, education is the one thing that they need to tackle.
Yeah.
Việt Nam và EU bắt đầu đàm phán cho Hiệp định Thương mại Tự do FTA bắt đầu từ tháng 6 năm 2012. Hai bên hy vọng có thể hoàn thành việc đàm phán sớm trong năm nay để giúp các doanh nghiệp EU và Việt Nam hiện thực hóa những lợi ích từ Hiệp định Thương mại được đánh giá là tham vọng này. Việc thực hiện hiệp định sẽ thúc đẩy hơn nữa quan hệ thương mại và đầu tư, cũng như tạo thêm cơ hội cho các doanh nghiệp từ cả hai phía. Việt Nam là nước thứ 3 trong khối ASEAN tiến hành đàm phán FTA với EU sau Singapore và Malaysia, và sau đó là Thái Lan. Sau khi Việt Nam, EU FTA có hiệu lực, hơn 90% xuất khẩu của Việt Nam sang EU sẽ thanh toán thuế 0%. Thương mại giữa Việt Nam và EU sẽ tăng 30 đến 40%, trong khi một loạt hàng rào thuế quan sẽ được gỡ bỏ. Việc ký FTA sẽ là một cơ hội tốt cho Việt Nam thu hút FDI cũng như tái cơ cấu, cải cách nền kinh tế theo hướng tăng cường cạnh tranh, và là cơ sở để Việt Nam sử dụng tốt hơn nguồn lực trong nước vào việc thúc đẩy sự phát triển của nền kinh tế.
Tiềm năng hợp tác giữa các doanh nghiệp Việt Nam và doanh nghiệp châu Âu nó không chỉ ở chỗ thị trường châu Âu là một trong những thị trường lớn nhất của Việt Nam cả hiện tại và trong tương lai. Làm ăn với châu Âu còn có một cái lợi là cái đẳng cấp kinh doanh của các doanh nghiệp châu Âu có thể nói là độ chuẩn mực rất là cao. Vì thế cho nên chúng ta cũng sẽ học hỏi được rất nhiều điều về quản trị và cách phát triển doanh nghiệp, phát triển thương hiệu. Các bạn hàng châu Âu về cơ bản là họ rất là nghiêm túc trong cái làm ăn, và nếu mà đã thiết lập được quan hệ với họ thì chúng ta hết sức yên tâm và có thể xây dựng một cái mối quan hệ làm ăn hết sức là lâu dài. Và ngược lại thì các doanh nghiệp châu Âu cũng tìm thấy ở thị trường Việt Nam một cái nguồn cung rất là lớn về các cái sản phẩm mà có lợi thế của Việt Nam, và đồng thời họ cũng có thể cung cấp cho Việt Nam rất nhiều những các cái công nghệ, đặc biệt là cái công nghệ về chế biến. Và có thể trong tương lai thì một cái lĩnh vực mà tôi nghĩ là cũng rất là tiềm năng cho các doanh nghiệp châu Âu, đó là những cái câu chuyện về thiết kế.
Những cơ hội và lợi ích từ các hiệp định này là vô cùng lớn và đã được nói tới rất nhiều trong thời gian qua, nên có lẽ cũng không cần phải bàn thêm. Nhưng vấn đề đặt ra là những thách thức, sức ép từ các hiệp định như vậy cũng không hề nhỏ. Điều này đòi hỏi cả hai bên cần tích cực xem xét đến phạm vi của hiệp định và sự phức tạp của các vấn đề cần được giải quyết. Một điều quan trọng cần lưu ý là những năm tới sẽ xác định tương lai lâu dài của Việt Nam. Nếu chính phủ thành công trong việc giải quyết các vấn đề được xác định bởi cộng đồng doanh nghiệp và một FTA toàn diện được hoàn tất thì chắc chắn Việt Nam sẽ trở thành một đối thủ cạnh tranh rất mạnh trong khu vực. Theo đó, vai trò của một số tổ chức trung gian kết nối giữa các doanh nghiệp châu Âu và Việt Nam là rất cần thiết.
Tôi nghĩ là vai trò của Eurocham này rất là đáng, có thể nói là biểu dương. Họ là một cái tổ chức doanh nghiệp mà đại diện cho cộng đồng doanh nghiệp châu Âu Việt Nam rất là tích cực, và không những là họ hỗ trợ các doanh nghiệp châu Âu làm ăn vào Việt Nam, họ còn có rất nhiều những cái trợ giúp cho các doanh nghiệp Việt Nam để nâng lên, để đạt cái chuẩn của châu Âu, để đáp ứng hàng hóa cho châu Âu. Đồng thời họ cũng là một cái tổ chức mà góp ý rất nhiều những chính sách tốt để mà chúng ta có thể hoàn thiện dần cái thể chế kinh tế thị trường của chúng ta.
Đối với cả các doanh nghiệp châu Âu đang hoạt động kinh doanh tại Việt Nam thì chúng tôi cũng gặp có một số những cái khó khăn, ví dụ như là về lĩnh vực về thuế, hoặc là những cái khó khăn liên quan tới cái thực thi về những cái quy định pháp luật tại ở các cấp địa phương khác nhau, cũng như là những cái thủ tục về mặt hành chính. Tuy nhiên là trong cái quá trình hoạt động tại Việt Nam thì Eurocham chúng tôi cũng luôn đồng hành cùng với chính phủ Việt Nam để có qua các kênh đối thoại cũng như là diễn đàn để có thể là bày tỏ những cái kiến nghị cũng như là những cái vấn đề của các doanh nghiệp để cùng có thể làm tư vấn cho chính phủ Việt Nam có thể đưa ra được những cái cải thiện cho cái môi trường kinh doanh hiện tại.
Việt Nam và cộng đồng châu Âu đã chính thức thiết lập quan hệ ngoại giao vào ngày 28 tháng 11 năm 1990. Kể từ đó đến nay, quan hệ hai bên đã đi vào khuôn khổ, phát triển nhanh chóng cả về chiều rộng và chiều sâu. EU trở thành một trong các đối tác quan trọng hàng đầu của Việt Nam trên nhiều lĩnh vực, đặc biệt là kinh tế, thương mại, đầu tư, đóng góp tích cực vào quá trình phát triển kinh tế xã hội và hội nhập kinh tế quốc tế của Việt Nam.
So one of the big issues this year is the completion of the FTA between the European countries and the Vietnam. So it should be more attractive for our audiences to hear from an Indo person. So Eurocham has taken a very active role in boosting the process. Tell us more.
Yep, I mean, as part of the free trade agreement that with Vietnam and the European Union, we've been working with the EU trade commissioners for, I think, since 2012. Yeah. So we've been having regular dialogues with them. There's been about 6 or 7 rounds. The last one has just been in March in Hanoi. So yeah, we've been working quite closely with them. Obviously, the sector committees that we run within Eurocham and the White Book as well is a good tool, to have those negotiations. So we've been speaking to, had meetings with the Director General for Trade and then the EU Commissioner for Trade as well. So we've been very active in those meetings.
What are the potential prospects for the businesses between the two countries once the FTA is signed?
I think it just makes us, if we come back to, the transparency issues, I think it just makes it clearer in how to do businesses, and it sort of gives you, I always call it like a standard of work, a service level agreement. That two parties know exactly where they stand, what each party needs to deliver and how they're going to deliver it. So I think it will open the doors for both parties. It's not just European companies that are coming to Vietnam, but also, Vietnamese companies that want to come into Europe. You've got some really good Vietnamese brands here. So, at least it opens the door for them to be able to then look at Europe as a market, and be able to, do the first steps, So I think it's nice that we have now we can return the favour, so to speak, to Vietnam. Vietnam has welcomed European companies into, the country for a number of years. So it's nice now that, Vietnamese companies that want to go over to Europe and expand their businesses, then, they have the opportunity to do that. And there is also like a framework to enable them to do it, because I'm sure it's a minefield for both companies, it's European companies that want to come over to Vietnam. It can be a bit of a minefield, like all the laws, all the paperwork, all the administration procedures. So I think it's good under this free trade agreement that, it's a little bit clearer for both parties.
So it has been a long time since the FTA negotiations started. Until now, what are the main obstacles that remain?
I think the biggest issue is always timeline. The Vice President of the European Commission, Connolly, and his team have really tried to sort of like push and keep the negotiations very active. So I think probably the biggest issue is just trying to get everything, signed, sealed and delivered within this year. I know they're aiming for it to be signed in October in Brussels, but I think obviously it's a negotiation. We're in the negotiation phase at the moment, and obviously those negotiations can take some time. But I think they're on track to do that. Obviously, we've been supporting the EU Commissioner for Trade, Jagaj, as well, and his team. So they've been very active coming over to Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. So I'd say it's just timelines. Can we get it done by the end of the year? I think, in terms of the Vietnam side, that's what they're aiming towards, and that's obviously what we're aiming towards as well. So, fingers crossed it will be signed by the end of this year, because I think it will be also a good start. It will be a good start to 2015.
Mm-hmm. So is this global trend to set up bilateral and multilateral agreements among regions and countries? Do you think that somehow these agreements conflict with each other?
I think we're in Vietnam. You've got so many around the world. You have so many different trade partners.
Yeah.
So I think there is going to be some overlapping, between the different agreements. But then you have different agreements with different people in place. So, I mean, there is always, when you deal with a lot of different shareholders, a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different business partners, you are going to have some overlapping, and I think that's just the way that it is, but I don't think there's probably going to be too much difference between all the different trade partners.
We talk about the Eurocham and the FTA, and I think that we should move to another issue that will be more interesting to audiences. I think that is your life and your own career in Vietnam. So I've known that you've been here in Vietnam for 10 years, and it's quite a long time. So tell us more about your experiences living here. What are the biggest changes in our country for the past years?
Yeah, I think I celebrate my 10th anniversary in June, which is good. I think it's completely changed. I was at a panel discussion yesterday about Vietnamese CEO leaderships, women in a practical economy, and we were talking about, how Vietnam has changed. There was a couple of foreign nationals that have been here, 10, 15, 20 years, and, I look at my staff, maybe 23, 24, they all felt very old if they weren't married, and 10 years ago, and now I look at that, my staff are like 29, 30, 31, and, they're starting to buy their own apartments, they're looking at having a career, they want to go and travel. So I think it's completely changed over the last 10 years. There's definitely been a lot of positives, I feel that, the generation a little bit younger than me, they have a lot more freedom. They're really, they want to be challenged. They want to see different things. They want to have a life experience. They want to have a work experience. So they're challenging themselves, which is great. They're not settling for, the status quo anymore. They really want to succeed. So I mean, I think in that respect, it's great. Negatives, you know, have we dealt with corruption? Have we dealt with transparency? Have we really dealt with the education system here? Have we seen improvements in that? Yes and no. You know, it's still very frustrating to open a business or run a business in Vietnam. But I think if you just look at the population, you know, they are really they're sort of teaching themselves. You know, they're challenging themselves to think differently. So I think that's, you know, that's been the nicest thing for me to see over the last 10 years. You know, my staff now want to own their own flat. You know, they don't want the mortgage. Obviously, they don't have to borrow the money. They just want to have the flat. Yeah. But you know, they want to start having their own lives, and they're challenging the status quo. You know, and that's good to see. You know, they're starting to all grow up and, you know, really contribute to the economy, which is good.
What in Vietnam attracted you so far?
You know, it's a really exciting place to live in, Vietnam. You know, the people are wonderful. You know, they're exciting, they're dynamic. But they challenge you. You know, they want you to strive to be better and to do better things. So, you know, for people like myself, and I think for speaking on behalf of the rest of the committee, you know, that's why we do what we do. You know, we want to make a difference. You know, Vietnam's a wonderful country. You know, I've been very, very fortunate to live here for the last 10 years. Very fortunate of what I've achieved. It's been hard work, but, you know, I don't know whether or not, you know, I would have got to the same if I'd stayed in England or if it had been a different country. And that's what we're aiming towards. So I think that's, you know, really, you know, why we're here. Definitely for me, you know, I fell in love with the country, the people, you know, and for me personally, I'm doing stuff I've never would do anywhere else in the world. And that's part of the issue for me, where if I ever was to go, where would I go? Mm-hmm. You know, because it's been an amazing journey here, you know, and I think the best is yet to come. You know, for Eurocham, it really is the best is yet to come. So I'm really looking forward to the next 2 to 3 years. Get the organisation shipshape. There's 3 women, 13 men. Yeah. So they say that 3 women, it's critical mass to get things done in a board of directors is 3 women. Yeah. So we have the right number. So now it's just we've got the strategy, the objectives, and getting everyone to deliver it. So yeah, it's going to be fun.
Being the first chairwoman of Eurocham, you also run the Article Vietnam, a human resource management committee. So in your point of view, what is the role of human resource management in a dynamic country like Vietnam?
I mean, for us in Adecco, we've been here 4 years now. Obviously, we're world's #1 in our field, HR solutions company. I think for us, what we're finding is that there's less job swapping, job hopping. You know, I think people are being a bit more realistic about their skill sets. People are being more realistic about salaries. So, you know, the market's actually becoming a little bit more mature, which is good. It's still what I would say candidate-driven market. So if you're a good candidate, you have a good CV, good skill sets, people will employ you, which is good. If you were looking, say, example in the UK or England or some parts of Europe at the moment, it's a client-driven market. Okay, so the client can pick and choose. Whereas in Vietnam, it's still going to be a candidates-driven market. I think what we need to do as an industry, not just Adecco but the whole industry, is really educate people on you know, how to prepare for a CV, how to prepare the CV, how to prepare for interview, and a lot of the companies do that. If you look at their websites, they have that information. One of the interesting things with Vietnam actually is, considering the market is so small within our industry, it's like one agency for every 100,000 Vietnamese. If you look at then Singapore, there's one recruitment company for every 3,500 people. So this market has potential, but it needs to have good quality agencies in place. So we're looking to set up some industry standards in Vietnam. And I think, you know, it's important to, you know, be updating people on what is happening in the labour market as well. you know, if I look at the more developed markets, as in, say, Japan, you know, some recruitment companies would actually do training as well. So, you know, while somebody's looking for a job, they can come in and work for the agency, and then we would have in Japan, we have a training center for engineers. So every time they finish their assignment, they come back into the Adecco training center for engineers. They get upskilled, and then they go back out to a company. Obviously, we're a long way off doing that in Vietnam, because it's a lot of investment and you've got to get it right. But I think, you know, that's something that we need to do as agencies. We need to be looking at agency work as being able to get people ready for work. So, you know, when people are, you know, 18, 19, you know, they can go and work for an agency, you know, earn their salary, know that they're going to get their social, medical, unemployment, you know, they're protected, but they're getting like on-the-job training as well. So we've taken the first step towards that. But I think if we really opened up a pure temp market in Vietnam, I think it would really help that 18 to 23, 25 to be better prepared. We've done a survey on Gen Z in Vietnam. We've done it within Asia, between the 15 and 18-year-olds. And a high proportion of that generation will actually look to recruitment consultants to give them career advice. So the good thing is that the agencies that are here have a good brand, and we are seen as a trusted advisor. You know, 15 to 18-year-olds will come and ask us for advice on careers, etc. But I think we need to be a bit more proactive to do it. The industry is still quite restricted, but we're hoping that it will open up more in the future.
I think that in the context of the high unemployment rate in Vietnam among the highly educated workers, I think that's one of the things that they should do is coming back to the training courses, such as the training courses in Adecco Vietnam. Okay, Nicola, thank you once again for being here today with us, and I hope that the job, the new roles in the Eurocham will be very, very successful, and you will play an important role to boosting the cooperation between the businesses between European countries and Vietnam.
Okay, thank you very much.
And once again, thank you for sharing your own story. That your adventure to be here in Vietnam, and I think that your story will inspire other women in Vietnam.
I hope so. I hope so. Thank you very much for having me today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Vâng, thưa quý vị, chúng ta kỳ vọng rằng FTA giữa EU và Việt Nam sẽ được hoàn tất trong năm nay. Nhiều cơ hội hơn nữa được mở ra đối với doanh nghiệp hai bên, như một phần vào vai trò hết sức tích cực của Eurocham và nữ chủ tịch mà chúng ta vừa có cuộc trò chuyện. Cảm ơn sự quan tâm theo dõi của quý vị dành cho chương trình, và hẹn gặp lại quý vị trong các chương trình tiếp theo của VITV.